The philosopher Daniel Dennett has a way with titles. An earlier volume was called Elbow Room, The Varieties of Free Will Worth Wanting. His new book is called From Bacteria to Bach and Back. Across a long career, he's been scratching one important itch: how to comprehend the importance of evolutionary biology and how it can and should restructure our understanding. In the new book, he addresses those age-old and most perplexing of questions. What is the relationship between mind and body? And what is human consciousness? And how is it even possible? For Daniel Dennett, mind is matter. There's no distinction to be had between brain and mind, and the idea of the meme is the vehicle through which to understand how cultural evolution has taken place. Sounds intriguing, not just infuriating. The author knows both responses are likely, and he joins me down the line from Massachusetts in the US. Daniel Dennett, brain and mind, it's an old philosophical problem. What do you think, in the sense that evolutionary biology, as I call it, has to contribute to this argument?
Well, brains are stupendously complicated, and in order to do the work they do, they have to be designed. And it's pretty clear that we can't design our own brains, so they have to be designed by natural selection. And that takes us a certain distance. It takes us to animal brains. Chimpanzee brains, even human brains, are products of the design work, the R&D done by several billion years of natural selection at the genetic level. But in one species, our species, we've also invented culture, although it wasn't an intelligent invention. It just grew up originally in the form of memes that were like viruses that just replicated differentially in the human milieu, and gradually this has turned into human culture, and that's what gives our minds their special properties. In the same way that your smartphone isn't very smart till you start putting apps on it, your brain isn't very smart until you start putting thinking tools, memes, in it.
Okay, well, let us hold you there, because I want to come back to memes. And one of the things that I love about your work, and infuriates me, is your reach for metaphor. Now, Coleridge, who's not of your school, thought all analogues, as it were, walked on two legs rather than four. And design is a metaphor, isn't it? R&D is a metaphor. We don't know if that's how to describe evolution, R&D, and intelligent design. It's a way of interpreting things.
Actually, I think it's stronger than that. I think that design in the strongest possible sense is as much to be found in the process of natural selection as in the intelligent design by human designers.
Tell me why you think brain and mind are the same thing.
Well, I suppose it's theoretically, logically, philosophically possible that they're not, but every other puzzling phenomenon we've ever put our heads to try and understand has proven to turn out to be part of the physical world after all. Reproduction, birth, and for that matter, the aurora borealis and volcanoes and the sun. These are all natural phenomena, and we should certainly exhaust the prospects for a naturalistic, physicalistic theory of consciousness before we try having a revolution in physics.
It's a kind of Pascalian wager you're offering, isn't it? It isn't that you know the brain and the mind are one, but you wager that it is one.
Yes, but it's a wager that science in general has made, and what I'm doing is working on the details, and working in particular at the most puzzling edges of that, advancing in front. We're learning more about the brain every day, and learning more about how it accomplishes its magic, and it turns out to be more like stage magic than necromancy.
Okay, well listen, we probably need 5 hours, and I don't even know whether I'm up to it, to talk about the relationship between the brain and the mind, but I want to read something from the beginning of a chapter, which for me is breathtaking. The world before Darwin, you say, the world before Darwin was held together not by science, but by tradition. Now, the first thing to say is Darwin is that important to you. And the second, that ignores, not only Galileo, but it ignores the Reformation, Protestantism, all kinds of revolutions that destroyed tradition. So I'm interested why Darwin is this important to you.
Very simply, he showed us how to unite the world of science with the world of meaning and culture and the humanities, with the world of politics and ethics and art. Only the Darwinian strange inversion shows how these things can all be fit together into a single vision.
So your argument is that Darwin offers us the framework, or the tools, to use a favourite term of yours, to be able to explain, like Catholics thought they could once explain, everything in human life.
Yes, and we do a much better job than the Catholics because we don't rely on mystery at any point.
Well, of course, the mystery may be that there is no mystery, as somebody said, but we'll come back to that. I want to now ask you about cultural evolution, which I think is the really interesting heart of this book, because Darwin didn't enter this territory, but you have. And what you're saying is culture is as explicable in evolutionary terms as is physical life. That's right, isn't it?
The short argument is that all of the wonderful, brilliant, intelligent design work that we see by artists and scientists and poets and politicians and craftsmen and architects and engineers, all that wonderful work depends on thinking tools that have evolved in the last 100,000 years, which is just a bare twinkling of time. It's passed down not through the genes, but through teaching and learning and just through observing each other and interacting socially. It's a profoundly social achievement. Now, one traditional view of culture is that it's itself a gift from God, or if not that, then it is the product of brilliant geniuses, great fountains of creativity who are themselves sort of miracles. And that's a pleasing idea in many ways, but it's just got to be false. And we're learning more and more about how much of the good design that we can find in human culture is the result of differential replication, competitive reproduction, exactly natural selection, applied not to genes in this case, but to means.
Okay, so there are two questions. You always speak of culture as if it's singular. It never appears as a plural in your book. If that's the case, what does Darwinian thought have to say about the extraordinary varieties of cultures, which are defined nationally, geographically, historically? Does it have anything to say at that level?
Of course it does. Biologists speak of life, not different lives. They do talk of different lives, but they talk about the phenomenon of life. When I use culture in the singular, I'm talking about the phenomenon of culture. But in fact, the explanation for all the variation in cultures and the underlying unification too, the reason is exactly the same in both cases. It's evolution. It's the origin of different species of beings.
I have to say, there are moments when you do sound like a Catholic, but a Darwinian Catholic. It always comes back to that simple explanation of evolution. But I want to read something else from early in the book, where you speak of culture, a process of evolution of cultural items, means that invaded human brains the way viruses invade human bodies. Now, actually, it doesn't stack up at any level, that comparison, does it? You can't resist human viruses, for instance. You can, as you look at the 17th century, resist Protestantism or Catholicism. There are all kinds of ways in which it just doesn't stack up.
Oh, I think you're just not using your own imagination.
No. Address the argument.
First of all, not 1% of the viruses that are in your body right now do you any harm. And some of them may actually be very important to keeping you alive. The negative connotations of viruses are entirely inappropriate once you understand what a virus really is. It's not alive, but it evolves. The same thing is true of memes. They're not alive, but they evolve.
So let me give you the example of the Catholic and the Protestant. These are conflictual. They both continue throughout history. So it isn't that one survives and the other doesn't. It isn't that they replicate differentially. Both continue to survive. And there is an element of choice in a way that there is no choice in getting a virus.
I think you're wrong on every count there. There's a lot of choice in what viruses you get and in what memes you decide to harbor. There's ways of avoiding viruses and there's a ways of avoiding ideas that you find toxic. But whether they're toxic or tonic, some ideas just replicate better. They are better at provoking human hosts to reproduce them than the competition.
But then explain to me why Protestantism and Catholicism have both sustained within one national culture across, at least the last 400 years, when they've been in intense and bitter and actually at times lethal conflict.
Well, there's no difficulty explaining that. First of all, this is a tiny fraction of the time of human existence, and it may very well be that Catholicism or Protestantism in its many, many forms will go extinct. After all, sects, different divisions within Protestantism are going extinct every day. There's been many more religions have been born and died and gone extinct than exist today, and Catholicism itself is undergoing huge changes and will undergo more changes in the future.
So the answer is it may, but it may not simply die out.
I'd be amazed if you thought that there was anything eternal about the Catholic religion.
I've no idea that there is, but all I'm saying is I'm still not persuaded you've offered me a sufficiently specific explanation of why these two things come. But let me take you to something in the same area, where you say the problem with introspection, it acquiesces in the illusion that there is an inner eye that sees and an inner eye that hears. Now, I'm interested, at a certain historical moment in Europe, introspection became a cultural fact, to use it in quotation marks. Protestantism, the invention of the soliloquy in Elizabethan drama, the invention of the autobiography. So in what sense is it an illusion?
Well, the sense that it's an illusion is the sense that there's a show going on in your head that is being watched by an intelligent audience. All that work that's being done, all that play that's happening in your brain is not being done in some special medium like television or like movies or like actors on the stage. It's being done in terms of informational structures that are influencing each other and using each other to accomplish the ends of controlling a human
So
life.
there's no point in any subjective account of this. So all those 17th century autobiographers who wrote and thought they were doing X are just mistaken.
Not at all. There's plenty of reason to develop those accounts. In fact, I've talked at length and written at length about what I call heterophenomenology, which is the scientific study of those very accounts. How people take their inner lives to be going. This can be studied by a novelist or it can be studied by a scientist. And in fact, the scientist can use the novelist's efforts as part of the raw material and inspiration for more scientific studies. My goal is to put human consciousness in all its magnificence under the microscope.
No, and I understand that, but the difficulty is the confidence you have. For instance, at one point you said it's an objective cultural fact that more people can hum White Christmas than Jesus, Saviour of Desire. Now, actually, I'm not even sure that's an objective fact. If you add China, where White Christmas isn't hummed much, or India, or Africa, it's perfectly possible to say you're wrong on something as basic as that.
Well, I suppose there's a small chance that my example is, shall we say, Eurocentric.
It's rather important if you conflate America or even Europe with the world.
I quite agree. But if we were to find, I don't know if anybody has any accurate statistics on which are the best known, the most widely spread musical tunes in the world, what would come out first, second, or third. But what I am suggesting is that Irving Berlin's White Christmas, whatever you make of it, I would put good money outdoes Jesu Joy of Man's Desire.
I want to ask you, as we come towards the end, you used the word earlier, life. And in the book you say, science can explain life. Well, science can explain existence, but what is the meaning of a life? What is the meaning of life? Science has nothing to say about, does it?
Well, the word meaning means many things too. Science can say a lot about various aspects of the meaning of life. And one of the things it can say, as I've written about at some length in some of my books, is that the meaning of individual human lives is itself a product of human thought and reflection, political activity, communal, mutual persuasion, and the rest. And this is where meaning is generated out of human lives, and it's none the worse for not trickling down from on high from some imaginary creator.
Okay, but it's odd because this book is laced with religious language. I just read you something. You want to move all that many readers from wary agnosticism to calm conviction. Actually, it was Prudence who said, I may not be a believer, but I have to use the language of religion. Actually, you are a believer. You're a believer in Darwin.
Well, I certainly am a believer in not in Darwin, the man, or he's certainly not infallible. He made many mistakes. I am a believer in the scientific perspective that he is typically described as the chief author of. And that vision has proven itself not in dozens of ways or thousands of ways, but in millions of ways. It is a magnificent human edifice of brilliant design. If you want to trust something, that's, I think, a good place to start.
And of course, as to play your own story back at you, it may evolve and die out at some future stage, but at the moment, I'm afraid, Daniel Dennett, we need to leave it. From Bacteria to Back and Back is published next week.